The untold story of Nahum, the prophet of Nineveh's destruction. The land of Judah trembled under the Assyrian yoke, an empire whose shadow spread like a plague over nations. In a small town called Elkosh, south of Jerusalem, lived a man whose name was destined to resonate through the centuries. Nahum, meaning the comforter. His name came from the Hebrew Nahum, and although little was known about him, his voice would rise like thunder against the most fearsome city of his time. It was the 7th century before Christ, a time when Assyria had reached the zenith of its power. The prophet Nahum carried out his ministry between 663 and 612 before Christ, a period when the whole world seemed to bow before Assyrian might. For generations, the Northern Empire had crushed its neighbors with unprecedented cruelty, plundering their wealth and enslaving their peoples. Nahum was not a palace man, nor did he belong to the priestly elite. He was a simple Israelite who loved his people and suffered seeing the oppression exercised by the Assyrians. Every morning, upon waking, he heard travelers' stories about the atrocities committed by the northern invaders, and his heart shrank with pain. One night, while sleeping under the stars of Judah, Nahum had a vision that would change his life forever. In it, the God of Israel manifested himself in all his majesty and power. He saw how the Lord rose up as a divine warrior, prepared to do justice against those who opposed him. The voice of the Almighty resonated in his ears like the roar of 1,000 storms. "Rise, Nahum of Elkosh, for I have chosen you to pronounce my judgment against Nineveh, the city of blood." Upon awakening, Nahum knew he had been called to a mission that few had dared to imagine, to announce the fall of the greatest military power of the ancient world. It was not a call he could ignore, for he felt the weight of the divine word burning within him like an inextinguishable fire. With fear and trembling, but with unshakable determination, Nahum began to prepare for his mission. He knew his words would not be well received, that many would label him crazy or a traitor. How could a simple man from Judah prophesy the fall of an empire that had dominated the known world for generations? However, in his heart burned the certainty that God was with him. The same hand that had led Israel through the Red Sea and brought down the walls of Jericho would now rise against Nineveh. And so, armed only with the word of the Lord, Nahum the Elkoshite prepared to announce divine judgment upon the most fearsome of empires. Nineveh, the jewel of Assyria, stood imposing on the banks of the Tigris River. Its walls formed a circumference of about 12 kilometers, and within them rose palaces and temples that seemed to challenge heaven itself. It was a city of contrasts, as much beauty as cruelty, as much wealth as iniquity. War had benefited the merchants of Nineveh, whose numbers rivaled the stars of heaven. Booty came to the great city in unimaginable quantities, and its shops overflowed with all the luxury items the world could offer. There is no end to the storehouses, an abundance of all sorts of valuable articles, the prophet Nahum had declared. But beneath this mantle of splendor lurked a much darker reality. Nineveh was a city thirsty for blood, which devoured its neighbors, only to return with booty and treat captives with brutal cruelty. Assyrian kings boasted in their own annals of mutilations inflicted on prisoners, of humiliated countries, and of confiscated treasures. In palace halls, Assyrian nobles celebrated each new conquest with banquets and feasts, while in dungeons, thousands of prisoners groaned with pain and desperation. It was a bloody city, full of violence and prostitution, as the prophet would later describe in his writings. With all its ferocity, Nineveh was exceptionally religious. An entire pantheon of gods filled its temples, many of them imported from Babylon. The names of Assur, Sin, Shamash, Raman, Bel, Nabu, Astarte, Ninib, Nergal, and Nusku resonated in priests' prayers and monument inscriptions. But these deities had not taught the Ninevites compassion or justice. King Ashurbanipal, who reigned in Nineveh in those days, had brought the Assyrian Empire to its maximum splendor. Under his rule, Assyria had conquered Thebes, the great city of Egypt, in the year 663 before Christ, proving that no fortress was impregnable to its might. In the streets of Nineveh, Assyrian soldiers marched arrogantly, their shields and armor gleaming under the desert sun. War chariots, with wheels reinforced with iron, thundered over the cobblestones, sowing terror among inhabitants and reminding them of the king's absolute power. The city had etched itself into humanity's memory for little more than murder, plunder, suppression, and rape of the weak, for war and all kinds of physical violence. Its name was whispered in fear in the tents of Bedouins and in the palaces of vassal kings. A century and a half earlier, the prophet Jonah had been sent to Nineveh to announce its destruction, but the people had temporarily repented, and God had spared the city. However, the Ninevites had returned to their old ways, and now did even worse than before. Their repentance had been superficial, like morning mist that dissipates with the first rays of the sun. Now, as Nahum contemplated in his vision the magnificence and wickedness of Nineveh, he knew that the time of divine patience had come to an end. The God of Israel, slow to anger but great in power, would rise to do justice. The city of blood was about to face its judgment. Nahum sat under the shade of a fig tree, with a scroll of parchment unfolded before him. His hands trembled slightly as he dipped the pen in ink. The words he was about to write were not his, but from the God who makes mountains tremble and seas dry up. The burden against Nineveh, he began to write. In his mind resonated the scenes of the vision he had received, God emphasizing his great power, showing his superiority over all Assyrian gods. It was not an easy message to convey, and even less to receive for those who believed themselves invincible. In the distance, Nahum could see the hills of Judah, that land he loved so much, and which for generations had suffered under the Assyrian yoke. How many times had he heard the lamentations of widows whose husbands had been massacred by Assyrian soldiers, or the sobs of parents whose children had been taken as slaves to distant lands. But now, the prophet felt a strange comfort in his heart. Precisely because of the meaning of his name, the Comforter, Nahum would become the bearer of hope for his people in a particularly dark time, seeing in the fall and subsequent ruin of Nineveh a sign that God had not abandoned Israel. With each word he wrote, Nahum felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He was not a court prophet, recognized and respected by the powerful. He was a simple man to whom God had entrusted an extraordinary message. Who would believe that Nineveh, the invincible city, would fall as predicted? As the pen scratched the parchment, Nahum described the majesty of the Lord. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and will not at all acquit the wicked. The Lord has his way in the whirlwind and in the storm, and the clouds are the dust of his feet. Nahum made extensive use of the divine warrior theme, the image of God as a military figure who made war against those who opposed him. As he advanced in his writing, the prophet began to detail the judgment that would come upon Nineveh. He described how the city would be attacked by an army with shields and chariots, how enemies would enter through the city gates and defeat it, looting all the silver and gold they had. Nineveh's chariots would burn, and its people would be destroyed. But it was not a message of simple vengeance. While prophesying about the future, Nahum also spoke of how God would break the yoke over Judah, probably the great annual tribute they had to pay to the Assyrians. It was a message of liberation for the oppressed. As evening fell, Nahum rolled up the parchment and contemplated the horizon. The sun was setting over the hills of Judah, tinting the sky blood red. It was a reminder of the judgment to come, but also of the hope that would be born from the ashes of oppression. With a heart full of a mixture of fear and confidence, Nahum kept the scroll containing the divine vision. He knew his words would provoke mockery and disbelief, but he also knew that each one of them would be fulfilled in its time. The God who had spoken through him was the same who had divided the Red Sea and stopped the sun over Gibeon. His word would not return empty. The Ninevites used to tell themselves, "I am, and there is none besides me," a statement that reflected their excessive pride and limitless arrogance. They considered themselves invincible, protected by their gods and their walls, which rose toward heaven as a challenge to any enemy who dared approach. Nineveh was compared to a den of lions, where Assyrian kings, like insatiable predators, tore their prey to feed their cubs. The prophet vividly described it. "Where is the dwelling of the lions, and the feeding place of the young lions, where the lion, the lioness, and lion's cub walked, with no one to make them afraid? The lion tore in pieces enough for his cubs, killed for his lionesses, filled his caves with prey, and his dens with flesh." From the walls of Nineveh, sentinels constantly observed the horizon, watching for any sign of danger. But they did not really fear any enemy. Who would dare challenge the mighty Assyrian lion? Their armies had conquered entire nations, from the shores of the Mediterranean to the mountains of Iran, from the deserts of Arabia to the fertile lands of the Nile. In the royal palace, King Ashurbanipal reclined on his throne of gold and ivory, surrounded by courtiers who flattered him like a living god. In many ways, Nahum's poetry gave vent to anger, expressed the relief and hope of all who had long been oppressed. It was the cry of the oppressed against their ruthless oppressors. Nahum saw in Assyria's fall an example of God's hand, which with his justice severely punishes all enemies of good, while mercifully and patiently preserving those who try to do good. It was not a message of personal hatred, but of divine justice. While Assyrian nobles enjoyed their banquets and concubines in conquered lands, millions of people suffered under their iron rule. The demanded tributes impoverished entire peoples, and any attempt at rebellion was crushed with a brutality that chilled the blood. In foreseeing the fall of this cruel and powerful empire, whose kings in their own annals boast of prisoners mutilated by them, of countries they humiliated and treasures they confiscated, Nahum described how the fate of the powerful and the wicked is decreed, deserved, and carried out. In Nineveh's markets, merchants exchanged goods from all corners of the known world: silk from distant China, spices from India, gold from Africa, wine from Greek islands. War benefited the city's merchants, who were as numerous as the stars of heaven. They prospered thanks to the suffering of conquered peoples. Temple priests offered sacrifices to their gods, imploring their continued protection for the city and its armies. But the God of Israel, the only true God, had already pronounced his sentence against Nineveh. Through Nahum, Jehovah had declared, "Behold, I am against you, says the Lord of hosts. I will lift your skirts over your face. I will show the nations your nakedness, and the kingdoms your shame." The shadow of the Assyrian lion extended far, but soon that shadow would vanish like mist before the rising sun. Nahum's message still held true. Decadence ends in destruction. Although the Lord is slow to anger, he is also great in power and will not acquit the wicked. In the lands of Judah, people groaned under the weight of Assyrian oppression. Each year, tax collectors arrived at villages and cities, demanding increasingly onerous tributes. Whoever could not pay faced terrible consequences: slavery, torture, or even death. For generations, Jews had endured the yoke of a wicked counselor, paying a large annual tribute that depleted their resources and broke their spirit. Families sold their lands, their animals, and even their own children to satisfy the insatiable demands of the Northern Empire. In Jerusalem, Solomon's temple remained as a symbol of Israel's unshakable faith, despite Assyria's attempts to impose its gods and idolatrous practices. Priests offered sacrifices and prayers, pleading for divine intervention against their oppressors. Nahum's prophecy was designed to bring hope to the people of Judah, who suffered the abuses of the Assyrians for many years. God cares for his people and will punish those who mistreat them. He will protect them, free them from oppression, and restore them. In synagogues and homes, elders told stories of how God had delivered Israel from slavery in Egypt, how he had defeated the Philistines through David, and how he had protected Jerusalem during Sennacherib's siege. These stories kept alive the hope that one day God would again intervene on behalf of his people. Meanwhile, at Judah's borders, Assyrian soldiers patrolled arrogantly, constantly reminding inhabitants who had the power. Any sign of rebellion was punished with a brutality that served as an example for others. Nahum's message was especially harsh. God, not the Assyrians, is the Lord of history. He can use nations for his own designs, but he is the only one who controls history and does not tolerate oppression. In the hills of Judah, shepherds watched their flocks while contemplating the horizon, wondering when the day of liberation would come. Some had heard Nahum's oracles and kept his words in their hearts, like a hidden treasure that gave them strength to go on. Just as God saved the Israelites enslaved by Egypt, so he would also liberate those oppressed by Assyria. This was the good news, which would be followed by celebration and thanksgiving. Among the exiles of Israel, those who had been deported to distant lands after Samaria's fall also circulated the words of hope spoken by Nahum. Although they lived among foreigners, they kept their faith and identity alive, dreaming of the day when they could return to the promised land. Nahum taught that God punishes violence, idolatry, cruel commercial practices, materialism, and cruelty. These were precisely the sins that characterized the Assyrian Empire and had caused the suffering of so many peoples. The cry of the oppressed had ascended to God's throne, like the smoke of a sacrifice. And now the Almighty would respond with justice and mercy, bringing down the oppressor and lifting up the humble. Nahum's word was like a balm for the wounds of the afflicted, a ray of light in the midst of the darkness of oppression. Nineveh prided itself on its defenses, considered impregnable throughout the ancient world. The city was proud of its invulnerability, with walls reaching more than 30 meters high and with a moat about 15 meters wide and 18 deep. What army could overcome such obstacles? The site of Nineveh was marked by two large mounds called Kuyunjik and Nebi Yunus, Prophet Jonah, as well as by the remains of its wall that formed a circumference of about 12 kilometers. Within this perimeter, the city buzzed with activity, secure under the protection of its formidable defenses. Assyrian engineers had designed a system of canals and gates that allowed diverting the waters of the Tigris River to create a natural moat around the city. In times of siege, this moat became an additional barrier for any invading army. The city gates, massive wooden structures reinforced with iron, were guarded day and night by armed guards. No one entered or left without being thoroughly inspected. Spies and potential saboteurs were executed immediately, often in especially cruel ways, to serve as an example. Atop the walls, watchtowers allowed sentinels to spot any suspicious movement kilometers away. Catapults and ballistae, the siege weapons of the time, were strategically placed to repel any attack. The inhabitants of Nineveh believed they would be safe behind these defenses, but fire would destroy them even in those places where they thought nothing could harm them. Their confidence in their own works had blinded them to the fragility of all human construction. Inside the city, arsenals were full of weapons, swords, spears, bows, arrows, shields, armor. Nineveh's army was formidable, with its war chariots that sowed terror on the battlefield. Assyrian soldiers were trained from youth in the art of war, becoming ruthless and efficient warriors. Architects and craftsmen had decorated the walls and gates with reliefs depicting Assyria's military victories over its enemies. These images served as propaganda and as a warning to anyone who contemplated rebelling against imperial power. But Nahum established the fact that the sovereign God would bring vengeance upon those who violated his law. The same God had a judgment of retribution against an evil that is also redemptive, bestowing his mercies upon the faithful. In his prophecy, Nahum had announced that Nineveh would end with an overwhelming flood, and it would happen when the Tigris River would overflow to sufficiently destroy the walls and let the Babylonians enter. This prediction seemed absurd to the Ninevites, who trusted in their flood control systems and the solidity of their walls. According to the prophecy, the disaster looming over Nineveh had no palliatives whatsoever. With an abundance of textual images, the prophet Nahum described the complete disaster. The fortresses would fall at the first shake, and the Assyrian army would be like a party of women soldiers, which represented a serious insult to warriors. The walls that were believed invincible were about to face their ultimate test. Nineveh's pride had led it to forget that no human work can resist when God has decreed its end. Like sand towers before the rising tide, the city's great defenses would crumble before divine judgment. Years before Nahum's prophecy, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, had invaded Judah with an army of almost 200,000 men. His war chariots had razed Jewish cities one after another, sowing destruction and death in their path. Jerusalem, under the reign of the pious King Hezekiah, had prepared to resist the siege. Walls were reinforced, a tunnel was dug to secure the water supply, and provisions were stored to withstand a long siege. From the walls of the holy city, defenders could see the immense Assyrian camp that extended as far as the eye could see. The tents of soldiers, the stakes of horses, and war chariots formed a temporary city around Jerusalem, like wolves surrounding their prey. Sennacherib sent his spokesman, the Rabshakeh, to intimidate the defenders and break their morale. With arrogance, the Assyrian emissary shouted in Hebrew so that everyone could understand, "Do not let Hezekiah deceive you, for he shall not be able to deliver you. Nor let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord, saying, 'The Lord will surely deliver us. This city shall not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria.'" But Hezekiah, instead of surrendering, tore his clothes and went to the temple to pray. The prophet Isaiah conveyed the divine response. God would defend the city for the love of David and his own glory. That night, something extraordinary happened in the Assyrian camp. As Nahum had prophesied, a divine intervention stopped Sennacherib's advance. According to biblical accounts, the angel of the Lord struck 185,000 Assyrian soldiers, forcing Sennacherib to withdraw, humiliated. Returning to Nineveh, the Assyrian king tried to hide his defeat, presenting it as a victory in the annals of his kingdom. He ordered reliefs built, showing the capture of Lachish, a city of Judah, but remained silent about his failure before Jerusalem. Nahum had announced that Sennacherib would die shortly after, and the house of his gods would become his tomb. While worshipping in the temple dedicated to the god Nisroch, Sennacherib's two sons, Adramelech and Sharezer, murdered their father as the prophet had prophesied. This event should have served as a serious warning for Nineveh. God's hand had clearly manifested, proving that not even the mighty Assyrian army could prevail against his designs. However, the kings who succeeded Sennacherib, Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal, ignored these signs and continued with the empire's expansionist and oppressive policies. During their reigns, Nineveh reached the summit of its iniquity and bloody deeds. Meanwhile, in Judah, the memory of that miraculous deliverance fueled the hope of a future divine intervention against their oppressors. If God had saved Jerusalem once, could he not also deliver his people from the Assyrian yoke definitively? Nahum's prophecy would come to confirm this hope, announcing that the God of Israel had not forgotten his people. Sennacherib's fall was only the prelude to a much greater judgment that was coming upon the entire Assyrian Empire. In the villages and cities of Judah, the story of Sennacherib's miraculous defeat was told again and again as a testimony that the Lord of hosts continued watching over Israel despite its infidelities and weaknesses. That first warning had been ignored by Nineveh. Soon a second would come, and this time there would be no escape for the bloody city. In the year 663 before Christ, the known world shuddered at shocking news. Thebes, the great city of Egypt, had fallen to the armies of Ashurbanipal, king of Assyria. This conquest demonstrated that no city, however powerful, was invulnerable to Assyrian power. Thebes, known as Noamon in Hebrew texts, had been considered impregnable for centuries. Protected by the Nile and formidable fortifications, adorned with majestic temples and obelisks that seemed to touch the sky, the ancient Egyptian capital was a symbol of power and permanence. However, the city had succumbed to the relentless advance of Assyrian troops. Its defenders, despite their valor and number, could not resist the assault. Its treasures were looted, its temples profaned, its inhabitants killed or taken as slaves to distant lands. King Ashurbanipal made an inscription regarding the fall of Thebes. The entire city was looted under the direction of my officers. Gold, silver, precious stones, all the treasure of his palace, bright-colored garments, great horses, men and women, were taken to Assyria. For Nahum, the fall of Thebes acquired special significance in his prophecy. If the princes and merchants of Nineveh found the prediction of their own destruction incredible, then God's prophet reminded them to meditate on the fate of the famous Egyptian city. Despite formidable military force and despite its boasted impregnability, Thebes had been razed. In his prophecy, Nahum rhetorically asked the Ninevites, "Are you better than Thebes, that was situated by the river, that had the waters around her, whose rampart was the sea, whose wall was the sea?" The implicit answer was clear. If Thebes had fallen, what made Nineveh think it would be different for her? The irony did not escape Nahum. The same nation that had destroyed Thebes would face a similar fate. The instrument used by God to punish Egypt would in turn be punished for its own sins. Thus, divine justice worked in human history, like a fabric of causes and consequences, where each action finds its appropriate response. Spies and merchants traveling between Judah and Egypt brought chilling stories about Assyrian cruelty in Thebes. They told how soldiers had massacred priests on the very altars where they offered sacrifices, how they had raped women before the eyes of their husbands, how they had dashed children against stones. These stories, far from inspiring only terror, began to feed a sense of universal indignation against Assyria. Even among its own vassals and allies, secretly grew the desire to see the oppressor fall. Babylonians, Medes, Scythians, and other nations that had suffered under the Assyrian yoke began to dream of the day when they could join forces against the common enemy. Nahum used the fall of Thebes as a historical precedent, a tangible example that even the largest and most powerful cities could be overthrown. What had happened to Thebes would happen to Nineveh, but with a fundamental difference. While Thebes might eventually recover, for Nineveh the judgment would be definitive. In the streets of Nineveh, the constant roar of war chariots was a reminder of the military might that had led Assyria to dominate the known world. These chariots, with wheels reinforced with iron and warriors armed to the teeth, were the pride of the empire and the terror of its enemies. Day and night, craftsmen worked in royal workshops, forging weapons, repairing armor, and building new chariots for military campaigns that never ceased. The sound of hammers on anvils mingled with the neighing of horses being trained for war. But in his prophecy, Nahum announced an unexpected fate for this powerful arsenal. "Behold, I am against you, says the Lord of hosts. I will burn your chariots in smoke, and the sword shall devour your young lions. I will cut off your prey from the earth, and no more shall the voice of your messengers be heard." The chariots that had brought destruction to so many nations would themselves be destroyed. Nahum described in detail how the last days of Nineveh would be. The city was going to be attacked by an army with shields and chariots. Enemies would enter through the city gates with their chariots and defeat it, looting all the silver and gold they had. Nineveh's chariots would burn, and its people would be destroyed. In the training field outside the city, Assyrian soldiers practiced the tactics that had given them so many victories. Discipline was fierce, and any sign of weakness was severely punished. Officers shouted orders, while recruits learned to move in unison, like a well-oiled war machine. But according to Nahum's vision, a day would come when this same army, famous for its fierceness, would flee like a group of frightened women, an image that represented the height of humiliation for Assyrian soldiers. Nineveh's blacksmiths were known for their skill in working iron, a relatively new material in weapons manufacturing. Assyrian swords, spearheads, and shields were coveted throughout the ancient world for their quality and resistance. Some vassal monarchs paid part of their tribute with iron, which was then transformed into the weapons that maintained Assyrian control over them, in a vicious circle of oppression. But Nahum warned that all these weapons would be useless when the moment of divine judgment came. In the year 612 before Christ, God's word through Nahum would be fulfilled when Babylonians and Medes allied to assault the city. The prophet also described how Assyrian warriors, who boasted of their valor and ferocity, would act on that fateful day. Their leaders would flee from the city like locusts. Those who had sown terror in entire nations would now know the taste of terror. In Nineveh's taverns, veteran soldiers told stories of their campaigns, of conquered cities and obtained booty. They drank and laughed, oblivious to the approaching storm. Alcohol, which flowed abundantly in these celebrations, would be one of the factors that would contribute to the city's fall, as Nahum had prophesied. Though they are entangled like thorns and drunken as drunkards, they shall be devoured as stubble fully dried. The roar of chariots, which had once been the sound of Assyrian power, would soon become the sound of its destruction, when enemy chariots entered through the breaches in its walls and traveled its streets, sowing death and desolation. While Nineveh delighted in its power and riches, oblivious to the prophecies announcing its fall, something began to develop beyond its borders. In the mountains of Media and the plains of Babylon, ancient rivals began to consider the possibility of an alliance against the common enemy. In the year 612 before Christ, Babylonians and Medes would ally to assault the city of Nineveh, as Nahum had prophesied. But before that moment arrived, a long process of secret negotiations and military preparations would take place. Cyaxares, king of the Medes, was an astute and determined ruler. His people had suffered for a long time under Assyrian domination, and now sought the opportunity to free themselves from that yoke. With patience, he had been rebuilding the Median army, adopting tactics and weapons that could successfully face the formidable Assyrian forces. In Babylon, Nabopolassar led a resistance movement against the Assyrian occupiers. The Babylonians, heirs of an ancient civilization, deeply resented their subjugation to what they considered a less refined and culturally inferior people. Their national pride, along with the desire to restore their ancient splendor, drove them to seek independence. Through emissaries traveling disguised as merchants, the leaders of Media and Babylon began to communicate and coordinate their plans. The alliance they forged was fragile, based more on shared hatred toward Assyria than on true friendship or common long-term interests. But for the moment, it was enough. In their respective territories, both leaders began to gather troops and manufacture weapons in secret. Assyrian spies, always vigilant, noticed certain suspicious movements, but the reports that reached Nineveh were arrogantly dismissed. Who would dare challenge the mighty Assyrian lion? Pride blinded the rulers of Nineveh, as Nahum had predicted in his prophecy. Meanwhile, other nations that had suffered under Assyrian rule watched these developments with interest. Scythians, Elamites, the kingdoms of Syria and Palestine, all waited eagerly for any sign of weakening of Assyrian power. Some began to send secret aid to the conspirators in the form of information, supplies, or even small contingents of troops. In Jerusalem, prophets and priests closely followed these political and military movements. For them, it was not simply a conflict between world powers, but the fulfillment of divine prophecies. Nahum had established the fact that the sovereign God would bring vengeance upon those who violated his law, that the same God had a judgment of retribution against an evil that is also redemptive, bestowing his mercies upon the faithful. Preparations for war intensified as time passed. Cyaxares and Nabopolassar refined their attack plans, carefully studying the weak points of Nineveh's defenses. They knew they faced a formidable task. The city was protected by walls reaching more than 30 meters high, and with a moat about 15 meters wide and 18 deep. No conventional frontal assault would succeed against such defenses. It was then that the Allies conceived a bold plan. They would use the Tigris River against the city itself, diverting its course to create a breach in the walls. It was a plan that required time, resources, and detailed knowledge of local geography. But if successful, it could achieve what seemed impossible: the fall of Nineveh, the invincible city. While these plans were woven in darkness, the words of Nahum resonated like a prophetic echo. Nineveh would end with an impetuous flood, and it would happen when the Tigris River would overflow to sufficiently destroy the walls and let the Babylonians enter. What military strategists planned as an ingenious tactic, the prophet had seen as an instrument of divine judgment. In the lands of Judah, Nahum's voice rose like thunder amid the storm. His words, hard as flint but full of divine authority, resonated in the ears of those who heard them, provoking a mixture of fear and hope. God is jealous and the Lord avenges. The Lord avenges and is furious. The Lord will take vengeance on his adversaries, and he reserves wrath for his enemies, proclaimed the prophet. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and will not at all acquit the wicked. In many ways, his poetry gave vent to anger, expressed the relief and hope of all who had long been oppressed, and suddenly saw oppression ceasing and the oppressor moving away. It was a message of comfort for those who had suffered under the Assyrian yoke. For many, Nahum's words seemed too bold, even dangerous. How dare he prophesy the fall of Nineveh when Assyrian spies were everywhere, ready to report any sign of rebellion or disloyalty? Some feared these prophecies might provoke reprisals against Judah, but Nahum did not speak on his own initiative. As indicated in his writings, this book recorded the vision of Nahum of Elkosh. We do not know if Nahum wrote or dictated the words of the vision, or if someone else wrote them, but what is certain is that they came from a divine revelation. Nahum employed figurative language, literary images commonly used with the second coming of the Savior, to describe the future devastation of Assyria. This nation would be burned as easily as dry straw in a field. Here was another example of the prophetic dualism so common in the Old Testament. where concrete historical events served as figures of broader spiritual realities. In synagogues and public squares, scribes and scholars of the law debated the meaning of these prophecies. Some interpreted them literally, expecting to see the fall of the Assyrian Empire in their days. Others understood them in a more spiritual sense, as a promise that eventually all evil would be judged and all injustice repaired. Rasmussen summarized Nahum's lesson with these words. The final poem begins with a prelude about the evils of the oppressive city, Nineveh. Its lies, rapine, and plunder, its cruelty manifested in thousands of dead, its fornication and deceit, and the seduction of nations, all this is declared. Because of all this, the prophet says that it would come to be hated. But not everyone in Judah received this message with joy. The kingdom was divided into pro-Assyrian and anti-Assyrian factions. During the reign of Manasseh, whose pro-Assyrian policy the book makes a veiled criticism of, many considered it more prudent to maintain the alliance with Assyria, paying tribute in exchange for protection. For them, Nahum's words sounded like a dangerous incitement to rebellion. However, for those faithful to the God of Israel, Nahum's prophecy was a reminder that history was not in the hands of human powers, no matter how great they seemed. It was the Lord who directed the destinies of nations, using even the cruelest empires as temporary instruments of his will, before judging them for their own sins. Above all, Nahum was also a prophet, and saw in Assyria's fall an example of God's hand, which with his justice severely punishes all enemies of good, while mercifully and patiently preserving those who try to do good. Thus, Nahum's voice, like that of a watchman in the night, announced that the dawn of liberation was approaching, that the long winter of oppression would finally give way to the spring of restoration. It was a voice crying in the wilderness, preparing the way for a new chapter in the history of God's people. Nineveh would not fall simply for political or military reasons. Its destruction, according to Nahum's prophecy, would be the direct consequence of its own sins, which cried to heaven for justice. The prophet detailed these sins unambiguously. It was a bloody city, full of violence and prostitution. As C.W. Seram says, Nineveh etched itself into humanity's memory for little besides murder, plunder, suppression, and rape of the weak, for war and all kinds of physical violence. This reputation was not undeserved. Assyrian records themselves glorified the cruelty of their kings and generals. In the palaces of Nineveh, Assyrian monarchs had ordered carved in stone the accounts of their conquests. These reliefs, which decorated the walls of royal halls, proudly showed scenes of burning cities, tortured prisoners, women and children led in chains. What for other nations would have been cause for shame, for Assyria was a symbol of glory and power. Nahum taught that God punishes violence, idolatry, cruel commercial practices, materialism, and cruelty. These were precisely the sins that characterized Ninevite society and had caused the suffering of so many peoples under its rule. Violence was the pillar upon which the Assyrian Empire had been built. Their armies did not merely conquer, they sought to terrorize, punishing any resistance with calculated brutality. The Assyrians were pioneers in using terror as a psychological weapon, erecting pyramids of human heads in front of cities that dared defy them, to break the will to resist of their inhabitants. Nineveh used to devour a city, return with the booty, and treat captives cruelly. Thousands of people had been displaced from their homes, separated from their families, and sent to distant lands to serve as slaves or colonists in a deliberate attempt to destroy national identities and prevent future rebellions. Greed and corruption prevailed at all levels of Assyrian society. The city's merchants prospered thanks to the suffering of conquered peoples. Nineveh's shops were stocked with all the luxury artifacts the world could supply at that time. Meanwhile, in the provinces, Assyrian governors and officers squeezed the last drop of wealth from subjected peoples. Idolatry and perverse religious practices also abounded in Nineveh. There was an entire pantheon of gods, many of them imported from Babylon. The cults to these deities often involved immoral rituals, including ritual prostitution and, in some cases, human sacrifices. All this had led Nahum to ask, what opinion should we have of this city of plunderers, of a city whose inhabitants delighted in diabolical cruelty, of a proud and arrogant city that said to itself, I am, and there is none besides me? The answer was clear. It deserved destruction. Despite its wealth and power, or perhaps precisely because of them, Ninevite society was internally rotten. Moral corruption had permeated all aspects of life, from kings' palaces to slaves' huts. Justice had been replaced by the law of the strongest, and compassion by contempt for the weak. The Lord was going to humble Nineveh for these sins. Its people would be exiled, taken captive, while many of the children and men would agonize in pain until death. The punishment would be proportional to the magnitude of the crimes committed. Nineveh's sins had not gone unnoticed in the eyes of the judge of all the earth. The day of retribution was approaching, and when it came, neither all the riches nor all the armies of the Assyrian Empire could stop the hand of divine justice. The siege of Nineveh began in the year 612 before Christ, when the combined forces of Babylonians and Medes surrounded the city, as Nahum had prophesied. The siege would last 3 months, during which all kinds of tactics were employed, such as diverting the course of the Kosa River or attacking simultaneously on several flanks to weaken the Assyrian defense. At first, the Ninevites showed confidence. Their walls were high and thick, their granaries were full, and their wells provided enough water to withstand a long siege. They had endured similar attacks in the past and had always prevailed. Why would it be different this time? As Nahum had prophesied, the city was attacked by an army with shields and chariots. The combined forces of Medes and Babylonians presented a formidable spectacle, with their standards waving in the wind and their weapons gleaming under the desert sun. From the walls, defenders launched arrows and stones against the attackers, while priests offered sacrifices to the gods of Assyria, imploring their intervention. But as days passed, and then weeks, worrying signs began to appear. The Allies' military engineers had been working tirelessly on a bold plan to divert the river's course to create a breach in the city walls. They dug channels and built dams, altering the natural flow of the waters. Meanwhile, inside Nineveh, the atmosphere began to change. Alcohol flowed abundantly among the defenders, as Nahum had prophesied. Though they are entangled like thorns and drunken as drunkards, they shall be devoured as stubble fully dried. Discipline relaxed, and morale began to decay. With an abundance of textual images, the prophet Nahum had described the complete disaster that was coming. The fortresses would fall at the first shake, and the Assyrian army would be like a party of women soldiers. This prediction, which would have seemed absurd months before, began to materialize before the horrified eyes of the Ninevites. As the siege extended, conditions within the city deteriorated rapidly. Food reserves began to dwindle, and diseases spread among the crowded population. The rich and powerful could still afford to eat well, but for most inhabitants, hunger became a daily reality. Priests redoubled their prayers, sacrificing more and more animals in a desperate attempt to appease their deities. Some began to practice forbidden rituals, including human sacrifices, in their desperation to obtain divine intervention. Finally, after 3 months of siege, what Nahum had predicted occurred. A flood of the Tigris River made a hole in the city wall, through which the Babylonians entered. The waters, which for centuries had been a source of life and prosperity for Nineveh, now became the instrument of its destruction. The final attack came through the now dry riverbed. Enemy soldiers penetrated through the breach like an unstoppable torrent, overcoming inner defenses and bringing death and destruction to every corner of the city. As the prophet had announced, Assyrian leaders fled from the city like locusts, abandoning the population to its fate. Those who had sown terror in entire nations now knew the taste of fear, seeking to hide from the justice that finally reached them. The scenes that followed were of indescribable violence. The invaders, thirsty for revenge for generations of oppression, showed no mercy whatsoever. Temples were profaned, palaces looted, houses burned. Nineveh fell and was razed to the foundations. The Assyrian Empire came to an end when Babylonians and Medes divided its provinces. Thus was fulfilled, with terrible precision, Nahum's prophecy. The city that had mocked entire nations was now the object of mockery. The one that had plundered others was now plundered. The one that had shown limitless cruelty now received an equally ruthless treatment. Fire spread rapidly through the conquered city, destroying even those places where the Ninevites believed they would be safe. Flames devoured palaces of marble and cedar, temples adorned with gold and silver, the houses of nobles, and the huts of the poor without distinction. As Nahum had prophesied, Nineveh's chariots burned under enemy fire. I will burn your chariots in smoke, and the sword shall devour your young lions. I will cut off your prey from the earth, and no more shall the voice of your messengers be heard. Smoke rose toward the sky in dense black columns, visible from kilometers around. It was as if God's hand had descended to execute the judgment announced by his prophet. The statues of the gods, which for so long had received sacrifices and prayers, melted in the infernal heat, revealing their impotence before the God of Israel. The prophet Zephaniah had also announced this total destruction, and he will stretch out his hand against the north, destroy Assyria, and make Nineveh a desolation, as dry as the wilderness. The herds shall lie down in her midst, every beast of the nation, both the pelican and the bittern, shall lodge on the capitals of her pillars. Babylonian and Median soldiers advanced methodically through the city, ensuring that nothing remained standing. Nabopolassar and Cyaxares had waited a long time for this moment, and were determined that Nineveh would never rise again. Every building, every temple, every palace had to be destroyed as a symbol of the definitive end of Assyrian rule. In temples, priests who had remained offered frantic sacrifices, desperately trying to secure divine intervention. But their pleas fell on deaf ears. The gods they had served, Assur, Sin, Shamash, Raman, Bel, Nabu, Astarte, Ninib, Nergal, and Nusku, proved powerless before the catastrophe. In the royal palace, the last defenders fought with the energy of desperation, knowing there would be no clemency for them. Treasures accumulated for generations, gold, silver, jewels, works of art, were looted by the invaders, thus fulfilling another part of the prophecy. Take spoil of silver, take spoil of gold, for there is no end of treasure or wealth of every desirable item. Libraries, which contained thousands of clay tablets with all the knowledge accumulated by Assyrian scribes, burned like torches. Irony of fate. While many of these tablets hardened in the fire, thus involuntarily preserving part of this knowledge for posterity, the civilization that had created them vanished forever. In the streets, chaos was total. Terrified civilians ran in all directions, seeking an exit that did not exist. The cries of the wounded and dying mingled with the roar of flames and the thunder of buildings collapsing. It was the end of a world. Nahum had precisely foreseen this horror. She is empty, desolate, and waste. The heart melts, and the knees shake. Much pain is in every side, and all their faces are drained of color. Nineveh's pride had preceded its fall, as the ancient scriptures taught. When the last flames finally extinguished days later, little remained of what had been the most splendid and feared city in the world. The prophecy ended with a relentless epitaph. "Your injury has no healing, your wound is severe. All who hear news of you will clap their hands over you, for upon whom has not your wickedness passed continually?" Thus ended Nineveh, the bloody city, in fire and destruction, as the prophet of Elkosh had announced. The words of God, pronounced through Nahum's mouth, had been fulfilled with terrible precision, demonstrating once again that his word does not return void, but accomplishes the purpose for which it was sent. The destruction of Nineveh was not just the fall of a city, however important it might be. It represented the end of the Assyrian Empire, a power that had dominated the known world for centuries. Babylonians and Medes divided its provinces, inaugurating a new era in Middle East history. News of Nineveh's fall spread rapidly throughout the ancient world, provoking different reactions. For peoples who had suffered under the Assyrian yoke, it was cause for jubilant celebration. For allies and vassals of Assyria, it was a warning sign and a moment to reconsider their loyalties. The disaster that had loomed over Nineveh had no palliatives whatsoever. As Nahum had prophesied, the fortresses had fallen at the first shake, and the Assyrian army, famous for its ferocity, had fled like a group of frightened women. In Jerusalem, priests and prophets interpreted these events as a clear divine intervention. Nahum's message was limited to affirming that the faithful God had not abandoned Judah. The enemy would not prevail. The punishment was coming to an end. For the Assyrians who survived the catastrophe, a long period of exile and suffering began. Scattered, without leadership or resources, many would perish in the following years as victims of hunger, disease, or violence. Others would be absorbed by local populations, gradually losing their ethnic and cultural identity. The Babylonians, under the leadership of Nabopolassar and later his son Nebuchadnezzar, emerged as the new dominant power in the region. They would build their own empire on the ruins of the Assyrian one, applying many of the same policies of conquest and deportation, although with a different style and approach. Nahum had taught that God punishes violence, idolatry, cruel commercial practices, materialism, and cruelty. These were precisely the sins that had characterized the Assyrian Empire. Now, the new dominant power would have to decide whether to learn from the mistakes of its predecessors or whether to repeat the same cycle of oppression and eventual judgment. For the kingdom of Judah, Assyria's fall meant a brief respite, but not a definitive liberation. Soon, they would find themselves under the threat of growing Babylonian power, which would eventually destroy Jerusalem and take the population into exile in Babylon. However, even in those difficult circumstances, the prophetic word would continue giving hope and comfort to God's people. Nahum's prophecy was limited to affirming that the faithful God had not abandoned Judah. His message was that, just as God had saved the Israelites enslaved by Egypt, so he would also liberate those oppressed by Assyria. This promise of liberation transcended immediate political circumstances, pointing toward a deeper and more lasting redemption. The remains of Nineveh would remain hidden for centuries, until in the 19th century, archaeologists began to discover its ruins. Under the desert sand, the proud buildings that had once amazed the world lay reduced to rubble, silent testimony to the truth proclaimed by Nahum. God's judgment is inevitable for those who persist in evil and oppression. As dust settled on the ruins of what had been the most powerful empire of its time, the prophet's words resonated with renewed clarity. decadence ends in destruction. Although the Lord is slow to anger, he is also great in power and will not acquit the wicked. With Nineveh's fall, a wind of hope began to blow over the lands of Judah. Nahum had proclaimed, "Celebrate, O Judah, your feasts, fulfill your vows, for the wicked shall no more pass through you. He is utterly cut off." It was time for the chosen people to lift their heads and look to the future with renewed confidence. The meaning of the prophet's name, Nahum, or the Comforter, now acquired full meaning. Precisely because of the meaning of his name, Nahum had become the comforter of his people in a particularly dark time, seeing in the fall and subsequent ruin of Nineveh a sign of hope. In Jerusalem, the temple was again filled with faithful who came to give thanks to God for liberation. Priests offered thanksgiving sacrifices, and Levites intoned psalms of praise. The smoke of burnt offerings rose toward heaven as a symbol of the renewed communion between God and his people. Nahum's message was very clear. Just as God saved the Israelites enslaved by Egypt, so he would also liberate those oppressed by Assyria. This was the good news, which would be followed by celebration and thanksgiving. The elders at the city gates told the young how the prophet's words had been fulfilled, thus strengthening the faith of new generations. The stories of Assyrian oppression and divine liberation were incorporated into the collective memory of the people, along with the exodus from Egypt and the conquest of the Promised Land. Nahum had taught that God punishes violence, idolatry, cruel commercial practices, materialism, and cruelty. Now, it was Judah's responsibility to learn from this example and avoid falling into the same sins that had caused the destruction of their enemies. In synagogues, rabbis interpreted the scriptures in light of these recent events, seeing in them a confirmation of God's faithfulness to his promises. Nineveh's fall meant the collapse of the Assyrian Empire, especially cruel and tyrannical with subjected peoples. It was an act of divine justice and at the same time of mercy toward the oppressed. Judah's merchants, freed from the heavy tributes imposed by the Assyrians, saw their businesses flourish again. Caravans again traveled commercial routes without fear of Assyrian soldiers, bringing goods from distant lands and taking Judah's products to international markets. Farmers cultivated their fields with renewed enthusiasm, knowing that the fruit of their work would not be confiscated by foreign tax collectors. Vineyards and olive groves, which for so many years had been neglected due to uncertainty and oppression, now received careful attention, promising abundant harvests for the future. Nahum had seen in Assyria's fall an example of God's hand, which with his justice severely punishes all enemies of good, while mercifully and patiently preserving those who try to do good. This principle remained valid, offering hope to the righteous and warning to the wicked. However, the most perceptive prophets knew that this period of relief would be temporary. On the horizon, the shadow of Babylon was already appearing, the new emerging power that would soon challenge Judah's independence. Nineveh's lesson needed to be well learned, because times of trial had not ended for the chosen people. Despite these clouds on the horizon, Nahum's message remained a source of comfort. God cares for his people and will punish those who mistreat them. He will protect them, free them from oppression, and restore them. This promise transcended immediate political circumstances, pointing toward a future and definitive redemption. Nahum, the man of Elkosh, had fulfilled his mission. His words, inspired by God, had announced with astonishing precision the fall of Nineveh and the end of the Assyrian Empire. Now, as he contemplated the events he had prophesied, he could verify that not one of his predictions had remained unfulfilled. The time of Nahum's activities had been deduced based on certain statements made in the prophecies. In chapter 3, verses 8 to 10, reference was made to the destruction of the city of Nahum, the Thebes of Egypt, as a fact already consummated. We know that Thebes was taken by Ashurbanipal, the Assyrian king, in the year 663 before Christ. Therefore, Nahum's prophecy must have been written after that date. Since this prophecy was about Nineveh's destruction, we know it must have been written before the year 612 before Christ, the date when the city fell. Therefore, we can assume that Nahum's ministry, with certainty, took place between the years 663 and 612 before Christ. During this period, the prophet had been an uncomfortable witness among his people. Since Nahum's prophecy developed around Jerusalem, it was probably a city in Jewish territory. There, surrounded by political factions divided between pro-Assyrian and anti-Assyrian, Nahum had proclaimed with courage the divine message without fear of possible consequences. Nahum was a poet. Seeing in vision the end of Assyria, he expressed in free and picturesque Hebrew the relief felt by his people. His literary style, rich in images and metaphors, served perfectly the purpose of conveying both God's majesty and the horror of the judgment that would come upon the oppressors. His book began with an acrostic, a stanza for each of the first letters of the Hebrew alphabet, a poetic structure that demonstrated both his mastery of language and the careful elaboration of his message. They were not improvised words, but a divinely inspired and artistically expressed oracle. Nahum's legacy would endure far beyond his time. His book would be included in the canon of Hebrew scriptures, forming part of the 12 minor prophets. Nahum consists of only 3 chapters, and each chapter emphasizes a particular theme regarding Nineveh. In chapter 1, Nineveh's destruction is initially declared, and God's great power is emphasized. Chapter 2 details the destruction that was to come. Chapter 3 provides details about various aspects of Nineveh's sin and its destruction. Throughout the centuries, Nahum's words would serve as a reminder that God is just, and that although he may delay in executing his judgment, he finally does justice. By studying what happened to the Ninevites in the days of Jonah and in those of Nahum, future generations would learn that when people turn away from sin, the Lord will forgive them, and that when they do not, they will be destroyed. As people studied the book of Nahum, they would also learn that God cares deeply for his people and will not allow their oppressors to go unpunished. They would also learn about the great mercy that the Lord shows to those who trust in him. Modern archaeology would eventually confirm the historical accuracy of Nahum's prophecy. In the 19th century, the French consul in Mosul began to search in the great mounds on the other bank of the river. The Arab workers he employed in these excavations, to their surprise, came upon a building in the mound of Khorsabad. Little by little, the ruins of Nineveh would return to light, mute testimony to the truth proclaimed by the prophet. Nahum's greatest legacy, however, would not be the historical details of his prophecy, however impressive these might be. His legacy would be the message that God, not human powers, is the Lord of history. He can use nations for his own designs, but he is the only one who controls history and does not tolerate oppression. This truth would continue to be relevant throughout the centuries, offering hope to the oppressed and warning to oppressors, reminding all that, ultimately, it is God's justice that prevails in human history. Nineveh's destruction was not simply a local or regional event. It was a lesson for all nations of all times. Nahum's message still holds true. Decadence ends in destruction. Although the Lord is slow to anger, he is also great in power and will not acquit the wicked. Assyria's destruction can be compared to the destruction of the wicked in any era. By studying the Ninevites in the days of Jonah and in those of Nahum, one learns that when people turn away from sin, the Lord will forgive them and that when they do not, they will be destroyed. This lesson would be repeated throughout history. Babylon, which had been an instrument in Nineveh's fall, would follow a similar path of conquest and oppression to finally be conquered by the Persians. The Persian, Greek, and Roman empires would also rise and fall, each leaving its mark on history, but none escaping divine judgment when their wickedness reached a certain limit. Nahum's prophecy was limited to affirming that the faithful God had not abandoned Judah. The enemy would not prevail. The punishment was coming to an end. However, the underlying principle was universal. God does not abandon those who trust in him, and finally does justice against oppressors. At a deeper level, Nahum had taught that history is not a blind cycle of nations rising and falling, nor is it determined solely by economic, military, or political forces. God, not human powers, is the Lord of history. He can use nations for his own designs, but he is the only one who controls history. Nahum taught that God punishes violence, idolatry, cruel commercial practices, materialism, and cruelty. These sins, which characterize so many empires and nations throughout history, are particularly abhorrent in God's eyes because they cause suffering to the weakest and most vulnerable. Nahum's prophecy also has an eschatological dimension, pointing toward a final judgment that will transcend all particular historical judgments. Nahum employed figurative language, literary images commonly used with the Savior's second coming to describe Assyria's future devastation. In the same way, the judgment upon Nineveh prefigures the final judgment upon all the forces of evil. For believers of all ages, the story of Nahum and the fall of Nineveh offers both comfort and warning. God cares deeply for his people and will not allow their oppressors to go unpunished. He also shows great mercy to those who trust in him. At the same time, the story serves as a severe warning against arrogance and oppression. Nineveh had said to itself, "I am, and there is none besides me," a statement that reflected its excessive pride. This type of pride, which leads a nation or individual to believe itself above all moral or divine law, inevitably leads to downfall. The lesson for nations is clear. No human power, however great, can defy divine justice with impunity. The same God has a judgment of retribution against an evil that is also redemptive, bestowing his mercies upon the faithful. The true greatness of a nation is not measured by its military or economic might, but by its commitment to justice, mercy, and humility before God. Nineveh's fall meant the collapse of an empire that was especially cruel and tyrannical with subjected peoples. It was an act of justice, but also of mercy for the oppressed. In the same way, all empires based on oppression are destined to fail, while those that seek justice and peace have the promise of divine blessing. In a world where the powerful continue to oppress the weak, where violence and injustice continue to cause suffering, Nahum's message resonates with urgent relevance. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knows those who trust in him. This promise continues to be an anchor of hope for all who suffer under the weight of oppression, and a solemn warning for those who exercise power without justice or mercy. As the centuries passed, and the ruins of Nineveh lay buried beneath the desert sands, the prophecy of Nahum continued to resonate throughout history. What had once been the most magnificent city in the world was now just a memory, a testament to the consequences of unchecked pride and cruelty. But the lessons of Nahum's vision transcended time, speaking to generation after generation about God's sovereignty over the nations. In the decades following Nineveh's destruction, the people of Judah would face their own trials at the hands of Babylon. Despite the brief respite they enjoyed after Assyria's fall, They too would eventually face divine judgment for their unfaithfulness. In the year 586 before Christ, Jerusalem fell to Nebuchadnezzar, and many Jews were carried away into exile in Babylon. During those dark days of captivity, the writings of Nahum provided a source of hope for the exiles. If God had judged the mighty Assyrian Empire for its cruelty and injustice, surely he would also judge Babylon in due time. And indeed, just as Nahum's prophecy against Nineveh had been fulfilled with terrible precision, so too would the later prophecies of Isaiah and Jeremiah against Babylon come to pass when Cyrus the Persian conquered it in 539 before Christ. The pattern established in Nahum's prophecy that no empire, however powerful, is immune to divine judgment when it persists in evil, would be repeated throughout history. The Persian Empire would rise and then fall to Alexander the Great. The Greek Empire would fragment and eventually be absorbed by Rome. Rome itself, despite its seeming invincibility, would eventually crumble from within, its fall hastened by corruption and moral decay. In medieval times, as rabbis and scholars pored over the ancient texts, they found in Nahum's prophecy a timeless message about God's justice. The rabbinical commentaries emphasized how God had remembered his covenant with his people, even in their darkest hour, and had brought down their oppressors. These interpretations provided comfort to Jewish communities suffering persecution in various parts of the world. Christian theologians likewise found profound meaning in Nahum's prophecy. They saw in Nineveh's destruction a prefigurement of the final judgment, when all evil would be destroyed and God's justice would be fully revealed. Augustine of Hippo, one of the most influential Christian thinkers, reflected on how the rise and fall of empires demonstrated that only God's kingdom would endure forever. When archaeologists began to uncover the ruins of Nineveh in the 19th century, the world was astonished at the discovery. The British archaeologist Austin Henry Layard excavated many of the great Assyrian palaces and discovered thousands of tablets from the library of Ashurbanipal. These findings confirmed many details of biblical accounts, including elements of Nahum's prophecy. One of the most striking confirmations came from the discovery of relief sculptures showing the very scenes of violence and cruelty that Nahum had condemned. The Assyrian kings had proudly recorded their brutal treatment of conquered peoples, confirming that Nineveh was indeed the city of blood that Nahum had described. Archaeological evidence also revealed how the city had been destroyed by fire and flood, just as the prophet had foretold. In the modern era, scholars from various disciplines, history, archaeology, theology, and literature, continue to study the book of Nahum. They marvel at its poetic beauty, its historical accuracy, and its theological depth. The prophecy serves as a reminder that historical events can and should be interpreted not merely in terms of political or economic forces, but also in moral and spiritual terms. For people of faith in the contemporary world, Nahum's message remains powerfully relevant. In a time when global powers still commit acts of violence and oppression, when justice often seems distant, the prophecy reminds believers that God is still sovereign over the nations. The same God who brought down Nineveh watches over the affairs of nations today. The story of Nahum and Nineveh also speaks to the responsibility of those who possess power and wealth. The lesson is clear. Nations that use their strength to oppress others, that build their prosperity on injustice and violence, will eventually face judgment. True greatness comes not from military might or economic dominance, but from justice, mercy, and humility before God. Perhaps most importantly, Nahum's prophecy continues to offer hope to the oppressed and marginalized. Just as God heard the cries of those who suffered under Assyrian tyranny, he hears the cries of all who suffer injustice today. The promise remains, "The Lord is good, a refuge in times of trouble. He cares for those who trust in him. In an age of rapid technological advance and global interconnection, when human achievements sometimes seem to challenge the very limits of possibility, Nahum's prophecy serves as a humbling reminder. The Assyrians too believed in their own invincibility, trusted in walls and weapons that seemed impregnable. Yet all their might could not stand against divine judgment when it came. As scholars continue to study ancient Mesopotamia and the historical context of Nahum's prophecy, new insights emerge that deepen our understanding. Yet the central message remains unchanged. Justice will prevail, oppression will end, and God's purpose for humanity will ultimately be fulfilled.
Ruth. Ruth 1. Before Israel was ruled by kings, Elimelech from the tribe of Ephrath lived in the town of Bethlehem. His wife was named Naomi, and their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. But when their crops failed, they moved to the country of Moab. And while they were there, Elimelech died, leaving Naomi with only her 2 sons. Later, Naomi's sons married Moab women. One was named Orpah, and the other Ruth. About 10 years later, Mahlon and Chilion also died. Now Naomi had no husband or sons. When Naomi heard that the Lord had given his people a good harvest, she and her 2 daughters-in-law got ready to leave Moab and go to Judah. As they were on their way there, Naomi said to them,
"Don't you want to go back home to your own mothers? You were kind to my husband and sons, and you have always been kind to me. I pray that the Lord will be just as kind to you. May he give each of you another husband and a home of your own."
Naomi kissed them. They cried and said,
"We want to go with you and live among your people."
But she replied,
"My daughters, why don't you return home? What good will it do you to go with me? Do you think I could have more sons for you to marry? You must go back home because I am too old to marry again. Even if I got married tonight and later had more sons, would you wait for them to become old enough to marry? No, my daughters. Life is harder for me than it is for you because the Lord has turned against me."
They cried again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth held on to her. Naomi then said to Ruth,
"Look, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and to her gods. Why don't you go with her?"
Ruth answered,
"Please don't tell me to leave you and return home. I will go where you go. I will live where you live. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. I will die where you die and be buried beside you. May the Lord punish me if we are ever separated, even by death."
When Naomi saw that Ruth had made up her mind to go with her, she stopped urging her to go back. They reached Bethlehem, and the whole town was excited to see them. The women who lived there asked,
"Can this really be Naomi?"
Then she told them,
"Don't call me Naomi any longer. Call me Mara, because God has made my life bitter. I had everything when I left, but the Lord has brought me back with nothing. How can you still call me Naomi when God has turned against me and made my life so hard?"
The barley harvest was just beginning when Naomi and Ruth, her Moabite daughter-in-law, arrived in Bethlehem. Ruth 2. One day, Ruth said to Naomi,
"Let me see if I can find someone who will let me pick up the grain left in the fields by the harvest workers."
Naomi answered,
"Go ahead, my daughter."
So right away, Ruth went out to pick up grain in a field owned by Boaz. He was a relative of Naomi's husband Elimelech, as well as a rich and important man. When Boaz left Bethlehem and went out to his field, he said to the harvest workers,
"The Lord bless you."
They replied,
"And may the Lord bless you."
Then Boaz asked the man in charge of the harvest workers.
"Who is that young woman?"
The man answered,
She is the one who came back from Moab with Naomi. She asked if she could pick up grain left by the harvest workers. And she has been working all morning without a moment's rest.
Boaz went over to Ruth and said,
"I think it would be best for you not to pick up grain in anyone else's field. Stay here with the women and follow along behind them as they gather up what the men have cut. I have warned the men not to bother you, and whenever you are thirsty, you can drink from the water jars they have filled."
Ruth bowed down to the ground and said,
You know I come from another country. Why are you so good to me?
Boaz answered,
"I have heard how you have helped your mother-in-law ever since your husband died. You even left your own father and mother to come and live in a foreign land among people you don't know. I pray that the Lord God of Israel will reward you for what you have done. And now that you have come to him for protection, I pray that he will bless you."
Ruth replied,
Sir, it's good of you to speak kindly to me and make me feel so welcome. I'm not even one of your servants.
At mealtime, Boaz said to Ruth,
"Come, eat with us. Have some bread and dip it in the sauce."
Right away she sat down with the workers, and Boaz handed her some roasted grain. Ruth ate all she wanted and had some left over. When Ruth got up to start picking up grain, Boaz told his men,
"Don't stop her, even if she picks up grain from where it is stacked. Be sure to pull out some stalks of grain from the bundles and leave them on the ground for her. And don't speak harshly to her."
Ruth worked in the field until evening. Then after she had pounded the grain off the stalks, she had a large basket full of grain. She took the grain to town and showed Naomi how much she had picked up. Ruth also gave her the food left over from her lunch. Naomi said,
Where did you work today? Whose field was it? God bless the man who treated you so well.
Then Ruth told her that she had worked in the field of a man named Boaz.
The Lord bless Boaz.
Naomi replied,
He has shown that he is still loyal to the living and to the dead. Boaz is a close relative, one of those who is supposed to look after us.
Ruth told her,
Boaz even said I could stay in the field with his workers until they had finished gathering all his grain.
Naomi replied,
My daughter, it's good that you can pick up grain alongside the women who work in his field. Who knows what might happen to you in someone else's field?
And so Ruth stayed close to the women while picking up grain in his field. Ruth worked in the fields until the barley and wheat were harvested. And all this time she lived with Naomi. Ruth 3. One day, Naomi said to Ruth,
It's time I found you a husband who will give you a home and take care of you. You have been picking up grain alongside the women who work for Boaz, and you know he is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be threshing the grain. Now take a bath and put on some perfume, then dress in your best clothes. Go where he is working, but don't let him see you until he has finished eating and drinking. Watch where he goes to spend the night. Then when he is asleep, lift the cover and lie down at his feet. He will tell you what to do.
Ruth answered,
I'll do whatever you say.
She went out to the place where Boaz was working and did what Naomi had told her. After Boaz finished eating and drinking and was feeling happy, he went over and fell asleep near the pile of grain. Ruth slipped over quietly. She lifted the cover and lay down near his feet. In the middle of the night, Boaz suddenly woke up and was shocked to see a woman lying at his feet.
Who are you?
He asked.
Sir, I am Ruth,
She answered.
and you are the relative who is supposed to take care of me. So spread the edge of your cover over me.
Boaz replied,
The Lord bless you. This shows how truly loyal you are to your family. You could have looked for a younger man, either rich or poor, but you didn't. Don't worry. I'll do what you have asked. You are respected by everyone in town. It's true that I am one of the relatives who is supposed to take care of you, but there is someone who is an even closer relative. Stay here until morning, then I will find out if he is willing to look after you. If he isn't, I promise by the living God to do it myself. Now go back to sleep until morning.
Ruth lay down again, but she got up before daylight because Boaz did not want anyone to know she'd been there. Then he told her to spread out her cape, and he filled it with a lot of grain and placed it on her shoulder. When Ruth got back to town, Naomi asked her what had happened, and Ruth told her everything. She also said,
Boaz gave me this grain because he didn't want me to come back without something for you.
Naomi replied,
Just be patient and don't worry about what will happen. He won't rest until everything is settled today.
Ruth 4. In the meanwhile, Boaz had gone to the meeting place at the town gate and was sitting there when the other close relative came by. So Boaz invited him to come over and sit down, and he did. Then Boaz got 10 of the town leaders and also asked them to sit down. After they'd sat down, he said to the man,
Naomi has come back from Moab and is selling the land that belonged to her husband Elimelech. I am telling you about this since you are his closest relative and have the right to buy the property. If you want it, you can buy it now. These 10 men and the others standing here can be witnesses. But if you don't want the property, let me know, because I am next in line.
The man replied,
I will buy it.
If you do buy it from Naomi,
Boaz told him,
you must also marry Ruth. Then if you have a son by her, the property will stay in the family of Ruth's first husband.
The man answered,
If that's the case, I don't want to buy it. That would make problems with the property I already own. You may buy it yourself, because I cannot.
To make a sale legal in those days, one person would take off a sandal and give it to the other. So after the man had agreed to let Boaz buy the property, he took off one of his sandals and handed it to Boaz. Boaz told the town leaders and everyone else,
All of you are witnesses that today I have bought from Naomi the property that belonged to Elimelech and his 2 sons Chilion and Mahlon. You are also witnesses that I have agreed to marry Mahlon's widow Ruth, the Moabite woman. This will keep the property in his family's name, and he will be remembered in this town.
The town leaders and the others standing there said,
We are witnesses to this, and we pray that the Lord will give your wife many children, just as he did Leah and Rachel, the wives of Jacob. May you be a rich man in the tribe of Ephrathah, and an important man in Bethlehem. May the children you have by this young woman make your family as famous as the family of Perez, the son of Tamar and Judah.
Boaz married Ruth, and the Lord blessed her with a son. After his birth, the women said to Naomi,
Praise the Lord! Today he has given you a grandson to take care of you. We pray that the boy will grow up to be famous everywhere in Israel. He will make you happy and take care of you in your old age because he is the son of your daughter-in-law. And she loves you more than 7 sons of your own would love you.
Naomi loved the boy and took good care of him. The neighborhood women named him Obed, but they called him Naomi's boy. When Obed grew up, he had a son named Jesse, who later became the father of King David. Here is a list of the ancestors of David: Jesse, Obed, Boaz, Salmon, Nahshon, Aminadab, Ram, Hezron, and Perez.